I'm here with Jeff Pearlman. He's a best-selling author, one of my favorite authors. I've told you many times, Jeff. I've read, I think, almost all of your books. You have another one coming out. Really excited for this one. It's about the Shaq and Kobe era Lakers. It's called Three-Ring Circus. I just love that title. How did you come up with that title, Jeff? I remember you. I think you had some sort of contest or something. Tell me about how you came up with that title.
That's funny. You're the first person to ask this. I just put on Twitter. I couldn't come up with a good title, and I think I said on Twitter, whoever comes up with the best title gets a book or something. I don't have any ideas, and just someone on Twitter sent in Three Ring Circus, and I was like, done. That's it. That's the best title. I don't remember the guy's name, which is horrible. He sent it to me.
Yeah.
But he's definitely in the acknowledgments, so his name is somewhere in the acknowledgments of the book, and I sent him a book, and yeah, that's it. Just community involvement.
Yeah. That is so cool. And honestly, that is something that I've enjoyed about following you. I like how you kind of get your fans and your readers kind of involved. Let's talk about the book. Comes out fairly soon, right? What's the release date?
22nd.
Okay.
22nd.
Available, obviously, at most major retailers, Amazon, bookstores, all over.
Yep.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions for you. I grew up a huge Lakers fan. In fact, really, the Lakers were kind of my first foray into, rooting for a team and becoming kind of a diehard fan. Why did you want to write this book? I mean, I know you live in Southern California. Are you a Lakers fan, or what kind of drove you to write this book?
I actually grew up a New Jersey Nets fan, now Brooklyn Nets, so I had no like super love for the Lakers. I didn't dislike them, but I was never a huge fan. But I wrote a book a bunch of years ago called Showtime about the Magic Johnson era, and I really enjoyed writing about the Lakers. Like, I enjoyed the organization. I thought they were really warm and sort of open and kind. That all comes from Teeny Bus. It was just kind of that way. And I always think, like, what is when you're trying to find a topic, you think a couple of things. Number one, has there been a definitive biography already done where it makes no sense to do another? And I just didn't think this era had one. And then I thought, would I enjoy it for 2 years? And I thought, I don't know, Shaq, Kobe, Lakers, it's a really fun topic. So why not? And I just kind of jumped in, Yeah. I just kind of jumped in. It was one of the hardest books I've ever written, but, ultimately fruitful.
You mentioned it's one of the hardest books you've ever written. How long did it take you from start to finish? I mean, was this multi-year project? What are we talking here?
About 2 years total.
Okay.
Which is kind of average. That's how long most of the books take. I give myself about 2 years.
Okay, gotcha. So with the book, I mean, do you give some background? Because I feel like when you talk about the Shaq Kobe Lakers, you almost have to talk about the few years leading up to their reign as champions, because you kind of have to understand those years to understand what makes them so special and how they got to that point. Do you kind of cover those Cedric Ceballos, Nick Van Exel years?
Oh, man. It's my favorite part of the book. I love those years.
Yeah.
I love it. So basically what happened is my last book ended with Magic having to retire from HIV. And this book really takes over. Del Harris is a coach, and Magic Johnson comes back. Because he came back during the 95-96 season. And if you remember, and obviously you do, like, those Laker teams had a lot of talent. I mean, you had Van Exel and Eddie Jones. You had a very selfish but skilled Cedric Ceballos. They were pretty talented. And Del Harris was the head coach. And Magic comes along, and it doesn't go well. He plays well, but it's a weird fit, and nothing really feels great about it. At the end of the season, they lose in the playoffs in the first round, and Magic is just exasperated, and he's like, to hell with this. He leaves, and it kind of sets the stage for them, maneuvering to get Kobe, and then signing Shaq as a free agent. And the thing that I really find interesting is, if you think about it, just talent-wise, at one point they had Kobe, Shaq, Nick Van Exel, Eddie Jones, Cedric Ceballos. I would say young talent-wise, that is probably the most talented team they had during this era.
Yeah.
But it didn't work. It just didn't work totally. But it was a ridiculously talented team. So I love those years. I loved going to see Del Harris in Dallas. I loved talking to Nick Van Exel and Eddie. It's really a fun sort of lead up to it all.
Yeah, and then they brought in Rodman. You're right.
But
I think
yeah,
I think you're right. I think that team, kind of that 98, 97 era, probably was more talented than some of those title teams. Um, let's see here. How many players did you talk to for this book? And out of those, who would you say was the most fascinating interview?
so I would say I got about, I don't know how many players. I interviewed probably around 400 people total, 300 to 400 people. And my favorite guy to talk to, this is going to sound really weird. They had for 1 year, 2000, they had J.R. Ryder on the roster.
Yeah.
Former slam dunk contest winner and former Minnesota Timberwolves, Portland Trailblazer, and Atlanta Hawk. And he was, I actually drove out to Arizona and knocked on his door because I didn't have a phone number. And he was not happy to see me. He was like, what the hell are you doing here? Why are you knocking on my door? Blah, 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 blah. And he's like, what are you writing about? And I was like, the Lakers. Shaq, Kobe era. He's like, oh, all right, I'll talk to you. And he's really smart and really kind of strange and out there. So he was actually oddly my favorite. I guess him and Phil Jackson. I spent about 8 hours with Phil Jackson in Montana,
Wow.
which is fantastic. And so those two guys kind of stand out.
Gotcha. Shaq always refers to himself as the big chief marketer. I don't know if you ever heard that term. He kind of claims that a lot of his beef with Kobe was, all kind of part of the show business aspect and just kind of hyped up by the media. Do you believe that? Do you believe it when he says that? Do you think their relationship was, salvageable, or was it just this big charade? What was it?
I don't really buy that actually at all. I don't know. I interviewed Shaq for the book. It was funny. We had a moment when I was leaving. It was a sort of the interview, and I said to him, "It's funny." I said, "It's funny how you always gave yourself nicknames, but you were always in on the joke. Like when he would do like Chef Diesel or Superman or whatever. It was always with like a wink. Like this is funny, right?" And I was saying how to him, like Kobe. This is when Kobe was still alive. I said, Kobe nicknamed himself the Black Mamba, but he really meant it. Like he actually meant it. Like he wasn't being sarcastic or funny. He like thought of himself now as this black, snake, and he was going to kill you, or blah blah blah. And Shaq said to me, "Now you know what I had to deal with, man." And I just think it was a really bad relationship in a lot of ways. Like they played well together, and that's what mattered most. And they won 3 championships in a row, and that's what matters most. So it's okay. But
Yeah.
Shaq wanted to be the big brother. Kobe had no interest in having a big brother. Shaq thought that Kobe was deferential. Kobe was never deferential. They sniped at each other in the media. I mean, it was really weird. You would have reporters around one guy's locker, and then they go to the other guy's locker and hear what he has to say. And then they go back to the other guy's locker and hear what he has to say about what he has to say. And they were like, 15 feet apart from each other, but they would just battle through the media. I don't think Shaq was trying to generate headlines. I don't think he was a Muhammad Ali type guy. I just think they didn't really like each other.
Yeah. After Kobe's death, Shaq has gotten pretty emotional. Do you think there's a part of him, even though, like you said, maybe they didn't like each other when they were together, why do you think he's shown so much emotion? Do you think there's a part of him that does have an appreciation for that relationship?
It kind of reminds me of, I've been in circumstances, once I spent a summer in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and it was for a summer internship, and it was the worst summer of my life. It was the worst summer of my life. I hated it. But when I left, there was something really sad about it. Like I felt like I was leaving something behind, and there's something profoundly kind of sad about that in a weird, weird way, where you're kind of miserable, and there are things about something you really hate, and yet when it ends, you're able to appreciate it. And I think, I just think they accomplished so much together, and they really did need each other to do that. I don't think those Lakers were going to win with just Shaq or with just Kobe. They needed each other, and I just think Shaq, when he was mourning for someone who was sort of there for years and years and years, and even though he didn't particularly like him, he was a part of his life for such a long period of time, and he could appreciate the athletic brilliance and sort of what Kobe brought to his, a certain level of athletic richness that he brought to his life.
Yeah, certainly. You're listening to Mariposa Community Radio, KRYZ 98.5 FM. We've got author Jeff Pearlman on the show. He's talking about his upcoming book about the Los Angeles Lakers. How much of an impact did Phil Jackson have on Shaq and Kobe? And what I mean by that is, obviously they didn't win until he came along. But also he kind of, at least at first, he came into the team and it was obvious that he envisioned Shaq as kind of the man, the go-to guy. And at that point, certainly Shaq deserved to be that guy. But it seemed like throughout their relationship, Phil, this is just my impression, seemed like Phil kind of sided with Shaq more. Do you have a thought on that and how Phil, obviously Phil's kind of a master manipulator himself. Can you kind of elaborate just on Phil and what he brought to that dynamic?
Yeah, well, it's funny, they played Shaq and Kobe, for the majority of their career before Phil came in, playing for Del Harris. And Del Harris was a very, very smart basketball guy, a very, very good coach, and a very, very respected human being. But he just talked and talked and talked and talked and talked, and he talked forever. It was interminable, and players really started to tune him out. So then they bring in Kurt Rambis as the interim coach, and Kurt Rambis has never been a head coach before. And he clearly is siding with Kobe, and he's trying to convince the other players to take Kobe under their wing and think about Kobe. And that really turned Shaq off. And when Phil came along, he made it very clear that Shaq was the center of this team. Shaq was his guy, and Kobe was the number two. And he sort of repeated that over and over again. And Kobe did not like that, obviously. Kobe was making requests that, I want the ball more, I can post up more, blah, 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 blah. But the thing that Phil Jackson had that Del Harris and Kurt Rambis didn't have is he had just this incredible respect based off of the last, 9 seasons in Chicago, 10 seasons in Chicago, where he won 6 rings. And he had a gravitas. So when he spoke, people had to listen. And his thing was, Shaq is the centerpiece of this team, and that's the way we're going to go. He definitely struggled with Kobe. He coached Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was much more willing to sort of give the triangle a go. Michael Jordan saw that he didn't have that much early team success playing under Doug Collins. So when Phil Jackson came in and he had this idea and it meant sort of giving up the ball more, Michael Jordan was open to it, and Kobe never liked the triangle. He thought he should be averaging 30 points a game. He thought he was the centerpiece of the offense. He thought he should be the star. He had this need to be the star. And I don't think Phil Jackson ever really, during the Shaq-Kobe tenure, adjusted to that or embraced that. And it became a real battle by the end. In that last season, 03-04, Phil Jackson was, I can't coach this guy anymore. And Shaq was like, I can't play with this guy anymore. And Kobe was like, I can't play with these guys or play under this guy anymore. So by the end, it was just a big mess.
Yeah. I find it kind of interesting, though, because, I've read a lot of books, magazines, all kinds of content about those Lakers. And Kobe, I thought Phil might be impressed with him when Phil first came on, because I know Kobe read Phil's book. I think he showed up at a hotel and met with Phil. Yep. Kobe really put in the homework and the study of the triangle offense, and he was eager, I think, to please. He did kind of have that mindset, though, that he wanted to be the man. But I always just found it interesting that Phil never really, saw that and was like, oh, man, this kid's done his homework. I don't know, just a thought I had. But
but the problem was he was, you're right, he showed up, he actually got Phil to autograph a copy of his book, I think Sacred Hoops, and, he was all into the idea of Phil Jackson coaching him, and he was enthusiastic, and he was a hard study, and he was a hard worker. But he could just be, at that age, he really ruined his presence on a basketball team. And there are just a million stories of him dribbling, guy open, yelling for the ball, just not passing, refusing to pass, taking crazy shots. If you look at his box scores, a lot of Kobe Bryant's box scores from back then, it's more 5 for 15s than you would believe. Yeah. 6 for 20, 7 for 22. And that killed teammates. And it wasn't just that he wasn't passing to Shaq. It's just that he wasn't passing. And he would take, and also there's just a long list of Kobe. Maybe he's playing against Vince Carter or Tracy McGrady or Allen Iverson or Stephon Marbury or Ray Allen, and just needing to take over because he viewed it as a personal challenge. I need to squash this guy. And it would drive teammates insane watching him like trying to cross over Vince Carter, Shaq screening for the ball, Kobe driving, pulling up, clanking a jumper, or even hitting a jumper when Shaq is easily available down low, posting up. Just so it was very hard. It was very hard to coach during that period.
Yeah. Is there I'm not trying to have you give too much of your book away, but is there a funny story you can relate or even just highlight a certain player who you found funny, or not even funny, but just maybe the most eloquent player? I know Rick Fox is a really good kind of mellow person to talk to. Just anything that jumps from your mind, whether it's a story or a player that you kind of enjoyed from the book.
Oh yeah, there are a bunch. I mean, I'll tell you, one of my favorites was was Mark Madsen, who was first round draft pick out of Stanford, not very skilled, but a bruiser and a banger and hard nosed, and was kind of Shaq's tackling dumber in practice, and tackling dummy. And the relationship between Madsen and Shaq is just awesome. And so Madsen is Mormon, and it's interesting because when I wrote Showtime, AC Green, when he came to the Lakers in the 80s, he was a virgin. He was known as a virgin and very devout and Christian and blah, blah, blah. And the other Lakers sort of turned him into a target. And they started taking bets when he was going to have sex and how quick it'll be and blah, 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 and trying to sway him. And, it wasn't very nice. And when Madsen comes along and he's this virginal Mormon, Shaq could not have been greater to him. And he like Madsen told me they were on a flight one time. They're flying their charter plane somewhere, and this flight attendant comes over, and Shaq goes, "Hey, are you Mormon?" And like Madsen told me another time he was like talking to some women, and they're like, "You're Mark Madsen?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh yeah, Shaq was here recently. He was asking if any of us were Mormon because he's trying to set you up." Like he was just going around talking from Mark Madsen. Like it was just really funny. And the other guy, he was great too. Like Shaq had this way. I know this isn't quite the question, but Shaq had this way. He was so good to people he didn't need to be good to. Like another guy, they had a guard out of Masters College named Mike Penberthy, who played about a year and a half. And he was an NAIA guard, kind of a point guard, shooting guard, mainly a point guard. He made the team, barely made the team. I think it's 2000. He has no money whatsoever. First game is on the road. He doesn't even own a suit. He goes to like Nordstrom. He buys a suit at Banana Republic, like a sports jacket. They don't let him in the arena at the Rose Garden because he's this small guy and no one thinks he's on the team. So after the game, Shaq's like, "Do you own any suits?" And he's like, "No." And he's like, "You're coming with me tomorrow." And Shaq takes him to his personal outfitter and gets him 6 suits. Like he was that. There was another guy, a guard named Joe Crispin. I think out of Penn State, and Crispin made the Lakers. I think it was 2002. Makes the Lakers. It's kind of an upset. It's like their 12th guy as a guard, and Shaq's like, "I want to fly your family in for our first home game from Pennsylvania." And Crispin's like, "I can't let you do that. I'm not going to let you do that." A few days pass. Shaq's like, "When are you going to give me the details for the flights?" Crispin's like, "I can't have you do that." Shaq's like, "I insist on doing that." He flew them all in first class. Like, flew the guy's family in first class to see his first game. Wow. And there's just a million stories like that I think he might be the best teammate of all time. Best superstar teammate of all time. For his different flaws and whatever, imperfections, he might be the best teammate I've ever heard of.
That's awesome. What did you feel when Kobe died this past January? And do you include that at all in your book, or had you advanced too far into the publication process?
I was horrified. I was. I'm sure, like a lot of people, it was one of those things where I was sitting in a coffee shop in Irvine, California, and a friend texted me, and I was like, "No way, no way, no way," and just horrified. And it's funny because later that day, I was talking to someone. I won't identify, and the person said, "This is good for your book, right?" And I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me? Like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, I don't.
Yeah.
What do I care? Like that actually really it rubbed me wrong in many different ways. Like, I'd rather this book sell 0 copies and Kobe Bryant and his daughter and those other 7 people still be alive. Like there's no. So it was devastating, freaking devastating. I probably felt the same way you felt.
Yeah.
It's crushing. The thing is, like, the Kobe in this book, it's just 96 to 04, and he's not that joyful human being in a lot of areas, but like the guy he became, I mean, he didn't live that far away from where I live, and the guy was just, by all accounts, like a decent human being and a good neighbor and a good dad and a good husband and really likable and engaged, and it was crushing. So the book was done by that point, and I talked with the publisher, and we were like, should we push the release date back? Should we move it up? And we didn't do either, but I was able to throw in at the front like an author's note, just sort of talking about it, because I could see people reading this book without any context and being like, screw this guy, how dare he? You know, because I write about Eagle, Colorado, and I write about the sexual assault situation in pretty good detail, but I wrote it all before he died, and I just thought I needed to sort of explain, or at least say my piece out. This is a part of his life, but it's not the completion of the life. This was just a period, and don't get it confused with the guy who died at 41. It's a different human being. So.
Yeah. Where do you think that flip where do you think that switch kind of flipped for him? Was it kind of becoming more of a leader on the court in his later years? Because he did seem to kind of open up to teammates more, and when he won his 2 titles later on in his career, kind of became more of an elder statesman in the league, opened up to people, wasn't so closed off. Do you think part of it was that, and then part of it was the fact that he had daughters now and realized that maybe there was a little bit more to life than basketball? What do you think it was for Kobe that helped him develop into that person?
So I think this comes off of seeing this happen with a lot of athletes through the years. There's something about being a former superstar who's no longer a superstar that has a pretty profound impact on most people. Used to be able to do this and that, and you really were this, larger than life entity, and suddenly you're not. Suddenly you're not jumping as high. Suddenly you're not shooting at a high percentage. Your teams stink. It changes a person, and it grounds a person, and it sort of reminds a person. It's almost like a gateway to the rest of their life. It's almost like you need those seasons. Patrick Ewing probably needed to be a member of the Orlando Magic and Seattle Supersonics at the end of his career as sort of a gateway to no longer being the Patrick Ewing. And I think, definitely from talking to people, like Kobe's mediocrity. I mean, he wasn't mediocre, but he was no longer Kobe.
Yeah.
Those last 3 or whatever seasons, I just think they really sort of made him mortal. They brought him back to being immortal. And I think that's really important. I really do. And obviously, it's not the same thing, but I think back to my own career and when I was young, and I thought I was the greatest writer ever, and nobody could touch me, and I'm the best, and look at me, I'm in Sports Illustrated, blah, blah, blah. And then, you have kids, you get married, you see your parents get older, you see different friends get older, you see family members pass away, you see babies being born, and you just realize, whatever, writing a great article, scoring 50 in a game, all that stuff, whatever it may be in your own personal life, it's not nearly as important as you thought it was. And it's not nearly as impactful as you thought it was. And he just really seemed like a guy who kind of was meant to be a dad, and not just meant to be a dad, but meant to be a dad of daughters. And I don't know, it seemed like he was, in the weird way, he took his passion that he had in basketball and turned it toward parenting, which I thought was pretty freaking amazing, actually.
Yeah, definitely. How close were the Lakers, even in their title years? I'm throwing a lot of these questions at you, and they might be tough to answer. They're kind of opinion-based, but if you're comfortable answering it, how close...
Yeah, go fire. Come
okay, on. All right. How close do you think the Lakers were? Even, after they won their first title in 2000, they had a lot of turmoil in 2001. Kobe, I think, vented to ESPN, the magazine, and Phil had some comments. Shaq, if the big dog doesn't get fed, the house won't get guarded, all of that kind of stuff. How close were they to actually breaking up, even in the midst of their championship years?
Not close. Not close at all. The thing is, they were all under contract, first of all. So that's kind of a big deal. They were all under contract. And I got to say, Jerry West, Jerry Buss, Phil Jackson to a lesser degree, they were really smart about who they brought in to surround those guys. It's kind of like I said at the beginning of this interview. The most talent Shaq and Kobe had around them was when they had Van Exel and Eddie Jones and Ceballos. But the best fit was when they brought in Brian Shaw and Ron Harper and Rick Fox and Robert Horry and Derek Fisher. I mean, he was there the whole time. But, they just brought in really smart guys to have around and level-headed guys. I think if you had a Nick Van Exel, who was very combustible, or Ceballos, who was very combustible, in the midst of that Shaq Kobe thing, it would have been kind of disastrous. But those guys were all, like Rick Fox had seen this crap before. He played in Boston. He was part of some really destructive teams. Robert Horry had lost a daughter when he was playing basketball in Houston, and he was mature. And Brian Shaw's parents and sister died in a car accident when he was a member of the Miami Heat. He was really mature. They were Ron Harper. Ron Harper was a guy who was supposed to be Jordan-esque, and then his knees blew out, and he was just this guy who held on and got a savvy veteran. They just surrounded them with a lot of calm, cool, smart people who sort of were Band-Aids, and Shaq could go to and say, "Oh, I'm pissed about this," and they'd be like, "Calm down." Or Kobe could say, "Oh, I'm pissed about this," and they would say, "Calm down." And it made Phil Jackson's job a heck of a lot easier because it was like having a bunch of gurus around two guys with really big egos.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, a couple more questions for you, Jeff. You're listening to Mariposa Community Radio, KRYZ. We've got Jeff Pearlman, best-selling author, on the show. He's got a new book about the Shaq and Kobe era Lakers coming up soon. It's called Three-Ring Circus. Jeff, the Lakers eventually, as they kind of started to age, they brought in Malone and Peyton, who were in the twilight of their careers. What can you describe kind of that season in a nutshell? Like, Peyton and Malone probably got there and were like, "Man, we didn't sign up for this." What was that season like? Do you think the Lakers made the right move by bringing them in? And just kind of describe that season, if you don't mind.
It's funny. I just said to someone the other day, you could actually write a book about that season, and it'd be a pretty amazing book. Just that season. So, first of all, you had the Kobe flying back and forth to Eagle, Colorado for his rape trial going on. So that was the biggest thing of that year. That year, superstar, probably your number one superstar at that point is flying in 20 minutes before the game starts. And he's spending his days being accused of raping someone and facing a very long time in prison. So you have that hanging over you. Shaq at that point was definitely a little fed up with Kobe, with Lakers. Wanted his contract redone, extended. Definitely wasn't in the best shape he'd ever been in. You could see he was starting to change a little bit as a player. He wasn't quite as dominant as he had been. Phil Jackson could not stand Kobe Bryant, couldn't stand coaching him anymore. Kobe was threatening to leave, to go to the Clippers. It was a freaking mess, man. It was a mess. And the thing is, there were multiple times when both Peyton and Malone said some variation of, "I didn't sign up for this. Like, this is not what I signed up for." Peyton was a really bad fit. He was pretty well behaved that season. He could be a real pain when he was with Seattle. He was pretty well behaved, but he was not a triangle point guard at all. Malone, I think, was an excellent addition until he got hurt. And the funny thing I will tell you is this: when I interviewed Jeannie Buss for the book, I said to her, "Why do you think 03-04 didn't work?" And I've interviewed her many, many times in my life. And it's the only time I think I've ever seen her get actually mad at me. And she's like, "Jeff, we made the NBA Finals. Like, what kind of expectations are there that a season didn't work when you make the NBA Finals?" And I actually think that's kind of an interesting, you know what I mean? Like, people view that season as a failure.
Yeah.
They did make the NBA Finals, and they lost to a really, really good team. Detroit was a really good team, and Malone got hurt in that series.
Right.
So it wasn't what they wanted. But I can't really say it was a failure of a season. It was just a freaking disaster of a season when you take into account everything that was swirling around at the same time. There was no rest. And also, you have to remember, a lot of the veterans at that point were really long in the tooth. Guys like Rick Fox, they were a really old team at that point.
Yeah.
Just really old. And when you're relying on you have so many injuries that you're counting on Devin George. And Devin George is a very solid NBA player, but when you're counting on Devin George to be a key contributor, your team's probably not where you want it to be.
Yeah, exactly. Again, another opinion question, but with Kobe, we talked a little bit earlier. He was inefficient at times. He could kind of be a chucker or a hoister, a little bit of a ball hog at times. Obviously, one of the most talented players, though, in NBA history. had the complete package, no real weaknesses. Where would you rank Kobe all time, if you don't mind me asking your opinion on that?
I mean, it's funny. I'm older than you are, and we always tend to bend a little bit to our generation.
Yeah.
So I was asked the other day by someone, is Kobe the greatest Laker of all time? And I always say, you certainly can make the argument. I always would put Magic first, because I just think Magic not only saved the Lakers, but saved the NBA, and was this sort of transformative figure. He was a 6'9" point guard. But I mean, Kobe's a top 10 all-time NBA player. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I've never bought the argument, is he better than Jordan or is he better than LeBron? I don't really see that. But he's definitely a top 10. And the fact that he was able to win 2 more titles without Shaq kind of cemented the legacy as one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, final question. Again, we're speaking with Jeff Pearlman, best-selling author. Got a book about the Lakers coming out in just a matter of days. I'm always curious, it's kind of a 2-part question, I guess, but number one, how do you track down all of these players? Because at some point, I would love to write a book. I want to write a book about Terrell Owens. I just think he's fascinating. But I don't even know. I'm a newspaper writer, and so I know how to put stories together, but I just can't even imagine the difficulty of tracking all these guys down. And then secondly, if you don't mind answering this, I mean, I really want to write a book at some point, but it's man, I don't even know if I would come out well financially, because obviously you got to pay money to travel to see these guys, all that stuff. Do you have any thoughts on that? And can you explain how you track these guys down?
Yeah. So a lot of it these days is social media driven. A lot of former teammates are on social media, Facebook or Twitter in particular, sometimes on Instagram. And a lot of times it just starts with reaching out that way, sending a DM to someone. Mm-hmm. You can oftentimes go through the teams. The Lakers weren't nearly as helpful this time as they were last time, but you can go through teams, and oftentimes they'll help you connect with people. Team alumni associations are often very good. There's also a thing I recently learned about. You can get it's like a gold subscription to whitepages.com, and you get a lot of cell phone numbers off of whitepages.com, believe it or not, if you pay a little more for it. So there's also a lot of so you talk to Rick Fox and you say, Rick, who do you keep in touch with? Oh, I keep in touch with whoever, Robert Ory. Do you think you could check with Robert, see if he could talk to me? Yeah, sure, I'll check. It's a lot of that. It's a lot of, can you connect me with this person and that person? It's one of my favorite parts. I love finding people. I love finding hard to find people and tracking them down. I kind of dig the search. As far as the sort of finances of it all, I mean, it's not easy. I mean, I've been writing these things as my 9th book. I get paid, pretty well to do it. But if you're writing your first book, it's a lot of putting your own money in. Yeah. It's a lot of sweat and grime and hard work and just digging and digging and digging and digging and digging. Generally what happens is you get an advance. If you're fortunate enough to get an advance, some publisher will say, okay, we'll pay you whatever, $100,000 to write your Terrell Owens book. And you basically have, that money is basically considered money. They're basically giving you that money, and out of that money you spend to report and work on the book. And what you hope is you sell enough copies that you start getting royalties, which happens after you earn the bonus back. So if they give you $100,000, once you sell $100,000 worth of books, then you start making money per book. Uh-huh. But it's hard. Royalties are really hard, and you want to get as high a bonus as possible, just because that's guaranteed money, as opposed to royalties, which are you kind of hope you get.
Right.
Writing books are great. It's great. It's for me at least, it's really hard, and it physically beats me up and mentally beats me up and leaves me exhausted and takes some years off my life. But at the same time, it's very rewarding and kind of enriching, and really tests your mettle as a journalist.
I can imagine. Well, Jeff, you've given me a lot of time. You've always been gracious with speaking with me. I really appreciate it. Again, you're listening to Mariposa Community Radio. We've got author Jeff Pearlman on the show. Be sure to check out his book, Three-Ring Circus. It's about the Los Angeles Lakers. Should make for a great read. Jeff, thank you again so much, man. It's always good to talk to you.
I just want you to know, Matt, of all the Mariposa-based sports journalists I've spoken to about this book. You are easily one of my top 5 favorites.
Oh, I appreciate that. So such a meaningful compliment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You bet. All right, man. You have a good day.
Matt, that was great.
All right. You bet. Yeah, a lot of fun.